Alrighty, my home slices. So we are going to start review. Review is going to pretty much stick to our schedule that we have posted on Edmodo. So make sure that you're taking a look at that schedule. And stay tuned to Edmodo for all my announcements as far as how we're going to get by not having review books and such. So just stay tuned and keep checking, every day, at least every day, or every couple times a day, just to be sure. All right, so let's start this review. We're going all the way back to the beginning here. So what are some of the big ideas to remember from last summer, from what we did for our summer assignments? First of all, the similarities and differences between the various countries that come to the New World and colonize, the Spanish, French, English, and Dutch. That is a very famous short answer question, having them, or having you, I should say, compare and contrast these various empires. Next, the English colonies obviously are going to be the ones that we focused on the most. Why do they develop? Why are they more successful? Where people go? What kind of people? What kind of economies? And then also what kind of mercantile laws are going to be imposed on those English colonists that wind up causing period three's American Revolution. Native Americans and their relationship with the Europeans is something that is a huge theme from period 1 and 2. We'll have to focus on that and see how the various empires, the Spanish, French, English, and Dutch, how they interact and what is their relationship exactly with the Native Americans. Finally, the horrible institution of slavery is going to be developed in the colonies. We must remember why, or what is the turning point of why slavery begins in the colonies, and what happens to indentured servitude. Okay, so turning point for our history here. U.S. history is 1492. We know Columbus sails that good old ocean blue. You can see here, this is a graphic of the Columbian exchange. Please know some examples of things or items or diseases, I should say, as well, that come back and forth between the New World and the Old. Um, whether it be, things like bananas or fruits, coming to the New World, or whether it be diseases being introduced, to the New World, and vice versa. Things like turkeys and pumpkins that are being introduced to Europe from the New World. Okay, so here we have an important idea at the top here. Different societies emerge. You can see the graphic here, the map of all the different major Native American tribes. And then you also see how the various empires come over and where they establish their empire, the French, the English, the Dutch, and the Spanish. So they each have their own goals as to why they're coming, whether it be economic, whether it be religious motives. Each of them have very different cultures as far as what they impose upon, things like on the natives, whether it be religion, whether it be indentured servitude, and they also settle in very different environments. So all of those factors are going to ultimately impact the colonialization. Start with Spain. Spain has very tight control over their little empire. You can see Spain in modern day places like Mexico, Florida, and then on the west coast of the United States, places like California and Arizona and such. So Christopher Columbus, we really consider the first one to come to the New World. Obviously, last year in World, you learn about a lot of other people that come before him. For our purposes, Columbus, okay, he's the man. We talked about the Columbian Exchange, the Treaty of Tordesillas, splits the New World in half between Portugal and Spain, and Portugal doesn't make out too well on that deal. The Pope splits it. The Spanish conquistadors, remember a guy like Hernan Cortez is one of our major examples of a Spanish conquistador. The encomienda system, where the Spanish are going to enslave the Native Americans, and then they're going to rise up in Poppy's Rebellion or the Pueblo Revolt, and you're going to see the Native Americans say, hey, listen, we're not in favor of this encomienda system or how you're treating us, and they wind up slaughtering the village there in Poppy's Rebellion or the Pueblo Revolt. In response to the Poppy's Rebellion, you're going to see the Spanish and the Native Americans have a much nicer relationship between each other. So for now, we'll say that the Spanish and the Native Americans, they overall have a better or a very good relationship with each other, but really that is in due part to the Papias Rebellion. You're going to see more intermixing between the Spanish and the Native Americans, hence the term mestizos. You're also going to see mercantilism be common between the Spanish and other countries that are going to come, we'll talk about later. Spanish missionaries, a lot of Spanish missionaries imposing religion upon the Native Americans. And St. Augustine there is the first major successful settlement in modern day Florida for the Spanish. Okay, so next up, we're going to talk about the French and the Dutch. We're going to group them together because they do have some similarities, but also the Dutch, there's really not too much to know about them. So first off, let's see the French. You see the French there on the map. They have a lot of territory, and you would think that would make them very powerful in the New World. However, they just aren't going to have a lot of colonizers. Um, Not a lot of people are going to come over from France. If they do, it's going to usually be single males. So that's not very ideal for populating the New World for them. Samuel de Champlain is their main guy. He is the guy that comes over, their main explorer. You're going to see a lot of French Huguenots up in the New France area, and they're also going to be trying to um, pushing religion upon the natives that they meet. So you're going to see a lot of Catholic missionaries for them. Now, the main reason the French are coming is for fur trading. They want to trade with the Native Americans. They're going to have a pretty close relationship with each other. Hence, the Huron Alliance is just an example of the French and the Native Americans coexisting and having this relationship over the fur. Um, you're also going to see them have their little colonial government structure, which is going to be kind of similar to some of the other um, representative bodies that we'll talk more about in the English colonies. So what to take away from the French? Good relationship with the natives, not a lot of people coming over, and also some religious motives. Okay, now we have the Dutch. The Dutch settle in New Amsterdam, that is modern day New York, okay, New York City. And you're going to see the Dutch, again, kind of like the French, not a lot of them come over. Their reasons are also economically based, meaning that they're coming over for the purpose of making money. You're going to see them have a pretty good relationship with the Native Americans. You're going to see some little scuffles here and there, but overall, we'll say they have a good relationship with the natives. They're not going to last too long. They will get removed by the British, and in come the British, and New Amsterdam becomes New York after that. All right, the Beaver Wars is just an example of colonial, or I should say Native American conflict between each other, where because all of the colonizers are coming over and having this relationship with the natives, they're giving them guns, and certain tribes that have guns become more powerful over the others. And the Beaver Wars are, as you can tell, over the beaver furs, or pelts, I should say, and really because you have the Europeans giving each other guns to the natives, and that doesn't turn out too well for some tribes. Finally, we get to the last major empire that comes over, and that's the English. That's who we spend most of the time on talking about. And the English colonies are usually broken up into four different zones. You have the New England colonies at the top. You have the middle colonies, obviously in the middle. You have the Chesapeake area, that's Virginia, Maryland, and then finally the southern colonies at the way bottom. So what you're going to see is these four different zones or sections are going to be very different from each other. There's more differences than there are similarities, but we'll definitely try to point out exactly what their similarities are because they're so far and few between. This also is a very good short answer question by the exam where they want to know about similarities and differences. And we always think about all the differences, so we'll definitely target those similarities coming up. So first off, you're going to see a lot of families coming over in the English colonies, certain areas more than others. but you're going to see more women coming over as opposed to, like we talked about, the French, where you see a lot of single males coming over. That also will help population in the future, obviously families and so on. You're going to see permanent settlements. We'll talk about places like Jamestown and Plymouth later on. And overall, the English colonists are going to have a hostile relationship with the Native Americans. So they're not going to be intermixing like the Spanish or even the French. So that's also very different. Okay, so as I was talking about before, the regional differences between the English colonies, New England, Middle, Chesapeake, and Lower South. Make sure you know who comes, why they come, and their environmental differences. So for example, you see a lot more families going to New England colonies than the other colonies. You see a lot of religious motives in the New England colonies and Middle colonies versus the South and Chesapeake. You see warmer climates in the South, better for farming, as opposed to the New England colonies that obviously have winters. So you're going to have other forms of making money in the Northern or New England colonies. Okay, so let's talk more specifically about the New England colonies. You're going to see the Puritans come over. Their motives are religious based, meaning they want to separate themselves from the church over in England. We call them the Pilgrims when we're in elementary school, but they're also called the Pilgrims. That term is interchangeable. Make sure you know the Mayflower Compact. That is a form, our first form of representative government, where the people on the Mayflower Compact, they come over on the Mayflower boat, I should say. They create the compact before they get off the boat, and it's just a set of rules to follow. And that's our first form of written government, if you will, in the colonies. William Bradford, the first representative leader there. John Winthrop, City Upon the Hill. That is something very important to remember. We always want to remember that the City Upon the Hill is an idea by John Winthrop, saying that the Massachusetts Bay Colony is supposed to be the shining example for all other colonies to follow. Right? City upon a hill, everybody looks up to it, so to follow, and they set the precedent essentially. The New England colonies are very close-knit, homogeneous societies where you're going to see pretty much everybody know each other in those little communities and also have say in the government. And that's what brings us to town hall meetings, our second form of representative government. Town hall meetings, exactly what it sounds like. People in the town get together and they decide on their laws and rules to follow. You're going to see Harvard University set up. Harvard and other institutions or universities like Brown, for example, are going to be set up in order to train ministers. So they are religious based. Again, remember, religious motives, why the people, the Puritans, came over in the New England colonies. Now, people like Roger Williams and Anne Hutchinson say, wait, this is not right. We should be able to have or be part of town hall meetings and not necessarily have to be part of the church. We call this separation of church and state. We have that today, but back then they did not. They said in order to be part of town hall meetings, you must be part of the church. Roger Williams speaks out, and so he is banned, and Hutchinson does even worse because she is a woman. And both of Roger Williams and Hutchinson, they set up another colony called Rhode Island. Rhode Island is very unique because Rhode Island allows a religious freedom. And that's our first colony that allows that. So that's very unique. Other things having to do with religion, the Salem witch trials, as you probably already know. It's all about putting people on trial for being witches. What is it really about? It's because people are losing their religion and people are getting scared. The halfway covenant was in order to answer those questions as far as people losing their religion and being part of town hall meetings. It says you can still be part of town hall meetings, but you don't have to be a full member of the church. You can be a partial member of the church. All right, so that's relaxing that that regulation on being part of the church in order to be part of town hall meetings. You're going to see a lot of mixed economy in the New England colonies. Yes, they're going to farm, but obviously they have winters, so they're going to have to also have other ways of making money. You're going to see a lot of shipbuilding. Okay, there's a lot of trees, a lot of forests up in the New England area, and they're going to build a lot of ships for the British Empire. You're going to see a lot of trading through their harbors, their natural harbors, okay, which the northern colonies are mostly known for. And you're going to see other things like fishing and whatnot for people to make money. Okay, So next, the colonies. These middle colonies, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, very diverse. Even today, you can say these states are very diverse, right? You go to New York City, very diverse place. Religion, very important in the middle colonies, like Pennsylvania is a big example of the Quakers, William Penn, and what they're all about is religious freedom. So our second colony that we see now that has or allows religious freedom is Pennsylvania, the other being Rhode Island, which we just talked about. In New York specifically, we talked about the Dutch earlier, how they set up in New York, and then are later pushed out by the British. You're going to see a lot of other types of people in the middle colonies, like Germans, Scots-Irishmen. Okay, we talked about the Quakers. All right, so a lot of different types of people in the middle colonies. And the middle colonies are going to have some agriculture. They're going to be considered the breadbasket of the colonies because they produce a lot of wheat. All right, but also New York is a huge center for trade because of their natural harbors as well. Okay, so next up we have the Chesapeake colonies. Chesapeake colonies are going to be considered Virginia and Maryland. Okay, so they're kind of like almost in the middle, a little bit below our middle colonies we just mentioned. So economic motives, okay, for Virginia. A lot of people coming to Virginia to make money. They're going to find out very quickly that you're able to cultivate a lot very easy, and the climate is very conducive for certain crops, as we'll talk about in a moment. So people coming over, the first successful settlement we're going to see is Jamestown. Remember, Roanoke was a unsuccessful settlement. They left, they come back a year later, and everybody's gone. It's kind of a mystery what happened. But anyways, Jamestown is successful. It almost wasn't successful. You have the first couple of years considered the starving time because people were, as it makes sense, and what it sounds like is people are starving to death. Well, two guys save the colony. First up, John Smith. He comes over and he institutes discipline. He basically says, hey, listen, you're not going to eat tonight if you don't work. That military style of discipline helps the colony be more successful. And then the second guy who comes in and saves the day is John Rolfe, and he brings a crop of tobacco, and that, as they find out, grows very well in this area. John Rolfe, remember, is the guy who winds up marrying Pocahontas, not John Smith, as the cartoon says. Now, you're going to see a labor force here in the middle, in the Chesapeake colonies, and that is indentured servants. Now, indentured servants are it's usually a person that comes over to the New World. They're usually someone who's either in debt or in jail. In order to earn their freedom, they will work as your slave, essentially, for about 4 to 7 years until their contract is over, and then they'd be free. Now, the reason indentured servants are used is because you're getting more people to come over to the New World. They'll work for you, but they're not outliving their contracts. So, for the time being, indentured servitude is what we're going to use. It's not going to be until Bacon's Rebellion, if you remember, that's the turning point where we start to actually use more slaves than indentured servants. So what is Bacon's Rebellion? If you remember Bacon's Rebellion, Nathaniel Bacon, he is upset because the Native Americans are attacking the colonists outside of Jamestown every time they go outside, and he wants the governor to do something. Governor doesn't want to mess up the trade relations with the Native Americans, so he doesn't essentially do anything. So Nathaniel Bacon takes it upon himself with his boys. Most of his followers are going to be indentured servants or former indentured servants, and they are going to go out and attack the Native Americans. Now, the government in Jamestown is going to send a force after Nathaniel Bacon, and eventually Nathaniel Bacon will die, not because he is attacked, but he actually dies of disease. And what they realize is we need to stop using indentured servants because, one, they're starting to outlive their contracts, and two, we don't want to train our competition, right? We don't want to train more people that could possibly rise up later on down the road and harm us either economically by starting their own farms or literally like Nathaniel Bacon's people rise up and fight us. So that's our turning point for slavery, that we start heading towards African chattel slavery. Now, as far as Maryland, we're going to see Maryland kind of be very similar with some plantations, but you're going to see Lord Baltimore set up his little proprietorship, if you will, and this is going to be a Catholic refuge for people. So he is going to pass a law called the Act of Religious Toleration. Be careful though, it's not what it sounds like because it's only for Catholics. So sorry if you're Jewish, sorry if you're Muslim, this is not going to be allowed. So we had 2 colonies that allow complete religious freedom in Rhode Island and Pennsylvania. Maryland, not exactly, it's just for Catholics. Okay, next. We have the southern colonies. The southern colonies are going to be similar to the Chesapeake region in the sense that they're economically based. People are coming here to make money. You're going to see mostly single males come to the southern colonies because there's a lack of family. Women don't want to, belabor in the heat. So you're going to see a lot of single males. So South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, they are going to be plantation based. Georgia is not really very populated at this time, but the Carolinas are. Technically, the southern colonies do include the Barbados and Jamaica because the British also have control of these. You're going to see a lot of rice plantations, later on tobacco, and then much later you're going to see cotton. So be careful. Cotton's not really around yet in these colonies. It's going to be a little bit later on. Majority of the population in the Deep South is going to be slaves. So when it comes time for period 3, talking about the House of Representatives, that's why we have the 3/5 compromise, because there's a lot of slaves in those colonies or later on states, and they want those people, those slaves, to be counted towards the population. Okay, so definitely remember how ethnically diverse the colonies are. You can see on this map all the different kinds of people that are coming throughout. Obviously, slaves a lot in the South. You have a lot of Englishmen all throughout the colonies. That makes sense. Scots, Irishmen, kind of on the frontier, okay, of all the colonies. You can see the greenish areas all the way towards the end because they were interested in having land themselves. And then some Germans as well on the frontier. All right, ethnically diverse. Economically diverse, like we talked about before, know how people were making money in all the colonies, shipbuilding, trading in the north. As you go further south, you have agriculture, things like rice and tobacco. So make sure you know those, how people were making money. Now, colonial identity, okay? How are people identifying with certain things, certain themes like religion, politics, etc. So these are big. I will say these are also very popular short answer topics and also really good topics for multiple choice. So religious freedom and diversity. Remember we talked about Rhode Island, complete religious freedom. Roger Williams and Hutchinson, they wanted separation of church and state. That's setting a precedent for what we have today. Pennsylvania, same thing, religious freedom. William Penn and the Quakers. Quakers, very unique type of people because they allowed things like religious freedom and also paying Native Americans for their land. How shocking. Maryland, we said not quite religious freedom, act of religious toleration. That's all for Christians. Now, as far as religion goes, there's the First Great Awakening. Remember, we talked about the First and then the Second Great Awakening. They both have to do with a religious revival in the colonies, later on the states. The First Great Awakening, the 2 guys associated with this is John Edwards and George Whitefield. Both of them are trying to make people more religious, and we do see this religious revival in the colonies. Now, religious freedom is not a reality of all the colonies, but make sure you know where it is a reality and then how it sets up the precedent for later on our First Amendment right of religious freedom. Okay, so make that connection. That's the seeds of religious freedom into, we see it all the way back in Rhode Island and Pennsylvania. Political developments. Mayflower Compact, right? The Pilgrims come over, self-government, write down their rules. New England colonies makes the New England colonies see the town hall meetings, I meant to say. Town hall meetings is all about being part of the church. In order to be part of the town hall meetings, people sitting down and coming up with rules and regulations. Now, Virginia, we didn't talk about this one yet. Virginia had their own form of religious government called the House of Burgesses. It's essentially a mini form of Congress. So that's very important. That's our third major example of representative government in the colonies. Pennsylvania also has its own kind of House of Burgesses. We just call that an elected representative assembly. Trial by jury is something common in most of the colonies, which is obviously something we have today, so another similarity there. And a lot of things that we have as far as impacting our rules, our laws, is going to be impacted or coming from the enlightened ideas, as we'll talk more about in period 3. Remember, when we're talking about politics, when we're talking about being represented in the government, make sure you know who's being represented in the government, right? Because women, minorities, slaves, they are not being represented. It's usually white, landowning males. So we obviously have a while to go in order to incorporate those minorities and other people. Anglicization of the British colonies means that based on where do we get most of what we know as far as rules, regulations, government structures, where do we get most of it from? The English, right? We model most of what we have off of the English, the way we run our economy based off the English, the enlightened ideas. So makes sense because they are the mother country. Important to know, as the colonies develop, oftentimes our interests conflicted with the goals of the mother country, and obviously we're going to talk now about how some of that relationship starts to deteriorate. So a lot of that story will come in this area, in the Ohio Valley River area, or more commonly in the French territory, as we talk about colonists pushing westward, manifest destiny, foreshadowing. Colonists moving past the Appalachian Mountains into that French territory is going to wind up leading to a huge conflict and a huge turning point in our history, the French and Indian War. Okay, so let's pave the way for period 3 as far as how we ultimately get to that American Revolution. So some early conflict with England. We see those mercantile laws. Make sure you know what mercantilism is, where a mother country takes resources from the colony. In this case, we are the colony and the mother country is England. Navigation acts are imposed upon us where we can only trade with England, and if we want to trade with anyone else, it has to go through the English ports. A lot of colonists start smuggling goods, and for a while, the navigation acts weren't heavily enforced, so we were able to get away with the smuggling because of a period called solitary neglect. But then things start to change when the Dominion of New England is set up, where Sir Edmund Andros needs to collect more revenue for the crown, and he starts imposing the mercantile laws like the Navigation Acts more strictly, and the colonists start to get really upset. And if it weren't for the Glorious Revolution, we probably would have had the American Revolution much sooner, because you see the date, it's almost 100 years before the American Revolution. So the Glorious Revolution over in Europe, because of William and Mary that come to the crown, they say, okay, let's go back to that period of solitary neglect, and things go back to normal for the next, roughly 100 years. Now, the westward expansion we were just talking about, the colonists pushing the frontier and going into the French territory, that sets up a major conflict, the French and Indian War. And because England does not want another conflict, they are going to implement the Proclamation of 1763, where they say you cannot go beyond the Appalachian Mountains, and the colonists don't like that because they want their right of manifest destiny. Okay. Next, key point here, solitary neglect comes to an end, okay, with a couple of different instances, okay, as far as we were just talking about We're resisting the imperial control. We're experiencing our own self-governments. We're using ideas from the Enlightenment. Everything's going really well in colonies. We're allowed to do basically whatever we want. Unfortunately, though, solitary neglect, where we are being allowed to do kind of whatever we want, comes to an end ultimately with that French Indian War. But we'll talk more about that in period 3. So some last points just to wrap everything up. The interactions between the Europeans and the Native Americans are very important to know. How the English, the Spanish, the Dutch, and the French, how they interacted with the Native Americans. Was it good? Was it bad? The English had a very bad relationship with the Native Americans, whereas the Spanish, following Poppy's Rebellion, had a very good relationship with the Native Americans. The English didn't intermingle, whereas the French and Spanish did. So make sure you know that. English colonization tended to reinforce their worldwide views on generals. So, like we were saying before, the English colonies were an extension of the British, right? The English, where we have their common societal ideas and customs and also legal codes and things like that. Wrapping everything up, talking about not only slavery but also some Native American stuff. We said there's a lack of racial mixing with the English colonies and the Native Americans. African chattel slavery really becomes prominent after Bacon's Rebellion. Remember, what makes the difference between a slave and an indentured servant? Okay, what's the benefit, okay, for slavery? Make sure you know that. Strong belief in racial and cultural superiority. So obviously, the white Englishmen believe that they are superior to these slaves that are coming over. That middle passage, as you can see on the map there, is very, very brutal. And you're going to see Africans develop overt and covert ways to resist slavery. So they could do things like run away, or they could do things like work slowdowns, break machinery. So there are various ways to resist slavery instead of just running away. Now, lastly, we have a couple of conflicts here. Okay, the New England colonies, the Pequot Wars, King Philip's Wars. You're never going to be asked about the specifics of them, but they're great examples to insert into your writing when you say, hey, listen, the English colonists had a bad relationship with the Native Americans. It didn't work out here in these two examples, Pequot and the King Philip's War, or Metacom, where the Native Americans, they don't win and they get slaughtered. Chesapeake region, okay, their examples, the Anglo-Powhatan Wars. As you remember, that might come to an end with the marriage of Pocahontas and John Rolfe. We talked about Bacon's Rebellion earlier. Stoner Rebellion in the southern colonies, that is not a Native American conflict. That's actually slaves running away from South Carolina, and they don't make it. They're unsuccessful, and the result of that will be stricter slave codes. We talked about Poppy's Rebellion, also called Pueblo Revolt. That's the Spanish turning point for their better relationship with the Native Americans. And then we also mentioned the French and the Dutch colonies with the Beaver Wars and how the Native Americans, now having guns, are more powerful over other tribes. Okay, and that is going to be it for us. We're going to wrap it up there. Make sure that if you found this helpful or you thought that this was good information, give me a little like or subscribe. There you go, Lena. And I hope everyone's staying safe, and I will see you guys soon. Peace.